Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, depending on where you are. Welcome to the International Population Data Linkage Network virtual conference being hosted worldwide in all different time zones. Today, we're going to have abstract presentations in the area of education. We're joined by a wonderful panel of speakers who are going to present the results in a few minutes. The first presenter is going to be Jennifer Enns, along with her colleague Kimberly Olaney from the University of Manitoba. After that, we'll hear from Eileen Lee, who is joining us from the University of Auckland. And then lastly, we'll be hearing from Shannon, who's from the University of Manitoba. So I look forward to this. I'm going to give each of the presenters 10 minutes, and I'll be giving them little warnings when they're approaching that. That should leave us with 15 minutes at the end of the presentations for Q&A. And there is a text box for you to ask questions, and I will curate that list and offer them during the Q&A session. So without further ado, I'm passing it over to Jennifer Enns and Kimberly Olaney and their paper, Participation in Boys and Girls Clubs of Winnipeg is Associated with Health, Social, and Educational Outcomes among First Nation Children. Thank you, Jennifer. Please take it away.
Good morning. I'm from the Manitoba Centre for Health Policy at the University of Manitoba.
And I'm Kim Olaney, School Performance Management Analyst from the Manitoba First Nations School System with Manitoba First Nations Education Resource Center. Situating ourselves, we're in Winnipeg, Manitoba, original land of the Anishinaabe, the Ojibwe, the Dakota and Dene people, homeland of the Métis Nation on Treaty 1 territory.
So the study that we'd like to share with you today focuses on the Boys and Girls Clubs of Winnipeg. The Boys and Girls Clubs are a part of a nationwide program that provide kids with a safe, supportive place to go before and after school. In Winnipeg, there are 12 clubs, and they're generally located in lower income neighborhoods across the city. The kids can drop into these programs or they can sign up for multiple weeks, and it's all free of cost to them. The kinds of activities they might be involved in are tailored to the specific neighborhood that they're from and the population that lives there, but they could include things like sports teams, arts and crafts projects, help with homework, leadership and mentorship programs, and job skills training.
Who we are, MFNSS and MFNERC. MFNERC is an educational organization in Manitoba that provides second and third level educational services to the 55 First Nations in Manitoba. In 2017, 10 of these First Nations amalgamated to form the MFNSS, and their educational systems are managed and administered through MFNSS. And we partnered with Manitoba Centre for Health Policy in this Boys and Clubs research project. And the research question we had was, what are the educational and social outcomes of First Nations children and youth who participate in the Boys and Girls Clubs of Winnipeg?
I missed my cue there. So to address the question, we started out by linking data together from the Boys and Girls Clubs and the Manitoba First Nations research file, and we linked those data sources to the Manitoba Population Repository at the Manitoba Centre for Health Policy. And that's a database that includes a number of different data sets it includes data for people from the entire province of Manitoba, most notably in the areas of health, education, and justice system. So we developed a cohort of First Nations kids who had participated in the Boys and Girls Clubs at least once from the period of 2005 to 2016. And then we developed a matched comparison group who were matched based on the participating kids' age and school year and the neighborhood that they lived in. We ran some descriptive statistics on that participating group. That's the group that I'm showing right now. And some of the stats that we thought were most important for the study were what age the kids were when they participated in Boys and Girls Clubs. So that's largely between the ages of 6 and 11. That's grades 1 to 5 in Canada. And then some of the other stats were important for us in terms of choosing covariates for our statistical models. So we saw that 92% of the families whose kids were participating received income assistance or income support. Many of them had moms who were teenagers when they had their first child. Many of the kids had also been in out-of-home care or in care of child welfare. And 58% had moms who had seen a doctor for mental health concerns. So that gives us also a sense of what kind of challenges these kids coming to Boys and Girls Club might be facing in their home lives. And we thought these were important variables to adjust for later on in our study. Okay, so now we're into the outcomes, and we'll start by looking at the education outcomes. What we're seeing is the probability in this first graph here, the probability that kids did well in grade 3 numeracy as their number of visits to Boys and Girls Clubs went up. You can see by the upward curve of that line that both boys in orange and girls in blue had a positive association between number of times they went to Boys and Girls Club and the chance of them doing well in grade 3 numeracy. For grade 3 reading, we didn't see that same association. The lines are mostly flat. And I'll show you the other education outcomes all on the same slide. Generally the same situation where we didn't see much of a positive association between participation in Boys and Girls Club and doing well in these outcomes, including in grade 12, graduating from high school. So I think largely what's going on here, we had really hoped to see that strong association between participating and these outcomes, but I think what's happening is that so if there's any sort of effect of the club drawing them into school and keeping them active in school, to see that it stays over time, that it's really important.
Jennifer,
We've lost audio.
we've lost your sound there.
I think we can hear you now.
How about now?
Yeah, that's better.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Now I lost my slide. All right. Okay, we were talking about education, and I was just trying to explain the reason why we might not see in Boys and Girls Club and these outcomes. So another thing to keep in mind is that the clubs are not necessarily focused on academic outcomes. They are teaching the kids social skills, peer-to-peer support. They're getting them interested in various activities that they might not have exposure to otherwise. And so that's a reason why we might also not have fully seen the effect that we were hoping to see for education. So I'm going to go to the next slide and we'll talk about social outcomes. The social outcome that we were interested in here was justice system involvement. So that combines 3 different types of justice system involvement. It's being charged with a crime, being a witness to a crime, or being a victim of a crime. So we're looking at all of that together in one variable. And so what we saw here, we calculated the risk ratio of justice system involvement amongst 12 to 17-year-old kids, comparing kids who participated to kids who had never participated. And you can see that in the crude model, the kids who participated were 1.23 times more likely to become involved with the justice system. And that seems a bit counterintuitive. It did to us. We thought the kids who participated might actually be lower risk. But I think that what that's telling us is that the kids who participated are really the ones facing a lot of hurdles in their lives. And so even though we tried to create a comparison group that was very similar, the participating kids might just still be a little bit worse off. And so we're seeing that here. So we adjusted for a number of the variables that I mentioned a couple of slides back. We adjusted for child welfare system involvement and mom's mental health and for income. And then we also adjusted for the number of times they had been to Boys and Girls Clubs. And we saw that after adjusting, the risk of justice system involvement dropped so that there was no difference between the 2 groups and they were the same. We saw the same thing amongst 18 to 24-year-olds. These are older youth who had previously had involvement in Boys and Girls Club up to the age of 18. And we saw the same change in justice system involvement after we adjusted for how much they had been involved in Boys and Girls Club. So we took these findings, we shared them with our collaborators at MF-NERC, with Kim and some of her colleagues, and they asked us some really great questions that we hadn't considered up until this point in the study.
So do the clubs recognize First Nations identity, and do they take any specific steps to be culturally inclusive or responsive? Are any elders or youth involved in the programs or programming decisions? Are staff trained or to respond to mental health trauma or crisis situations kids may be experiencing? Are there opportunities for participants to give feedback on how the clubs impact their lives?
And so what our plan next steps is to take these questions to the Boys and Girls Clubs, to share these findings with them and to talk about these questions and see whether the study findings might end up impacting some of their programming decisions and planning. So that's the end of our talk. Thanks very much for listening, and thanks to our many collaborators and supporters and funders of this study. If you have any other questions that we aren't able to address today, please feel free to reach out to me.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Kimberly. Very appreciate the presentation. I'm sure we'll have some questions after the other presenters also go. So Eileen Lee, passing it over to you from the University of Auckland. And your paper is entitled "The Association Between Mode of Delivery and Later Educational Outcomes."
Kia ora, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thanks very much for the opportunity to present here today. Today I'm going to talk you through a study I have been working on investigating the associations between mode of delivery and later educational outcomes using linked administrative data sets in New Zealand. So this study utilized data from the integrated data infrastructure, also known as the IDI. So IDI in New Zealand is a large research database that contains microdata about people and households in New Zealand. Its data sources are contributed by Stats New Zealand Service and government agencies, for example, Department of Internal Affairs, Ministry of Education, and Ministry of Health. Each data source contains individual level data, and they can be linked across by a unique identifier for each person. And so here is the Stats New Zealand disclaimer saying that the opinions, findings, and conclusions are those of the authors, not from Stats New Zealand. And access to this de-identified data used in this study was provided by Stats New Zealand in accordance with security and confidentiality provisions of the Statistics Act 1975.
Eileen, sorry to interrupt. We can't actually see your presentation.
Sorry. Could you see it now?
No, just I'm just going to stop your sharing. Just try to reshare your presentation again.
Okay. How about now?
That's much better. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Thank you. And sorry about that. Moving on to my next slide. Oops. A bit more background and motivation of this study. We are interested in the impact of mode of delivery on children's data educational and cognitive outcomes. And more specifically, we're interested in cesarean section, C-section. We all know that C-section is a life-saving intervention, and it has increasing global usage. However, there are some concerns around that increasing trend, mainly because C-section may lead to short-term and long-term health effects for both the mother and the child. From previous study, evidence suggests that delivery method has impacts on children's cognitive development. However, the current literature tells us about these mixed findings. So I've listed a couple here. The first two basically said C-section born children do perform better than vaginally delivered, C-section born children do underperform compared with vaginally delivered children. However, the third one did not find such association. So you may wonder, why is C-section hypothesis to be linked to worse cognitive outcomes? One possible mechanism is that C-section alters the colonization and composition of early life gut microbiota. and gut microbiota is linked to early brain development and may influence later cognitive developments. In terms of our study, as I said, we used New Zealand population datasets. So our participants are children born in New Zealand between 1996 to 1998. 3 delivery methods were identified based on ICD-9 code from the mother's hospital records. So those 3 are listed here and their corresponding ICD-9 codes. We have unassisted vaginally delivery, assisted vaginally delivery, and C-section. In terms of the educational outcomes that we chose for the children, these are the National Certificate of Educational Achievement, known as NCEA, Level 2 percentile score, NCEA Level 2 highest endorsement, and university entrance. There are some reasons for choosing these outcomes, but I'll just skip here today. Note that the first one, percentile score, we treated this as a continuous variable, and it ranges from 0 to 100 roughly. The second and third one are categorical variables, where the second one has got 3 levels, as you will see later in the results part, that has excellence and merit endorsement. The third one, university entrance, is a binary yes/no variable. So here are some more explanations on those 3 outcomes, but I will just quickly go through them. In terms of confounders, we have included a wide range of confounders, including New Zealand deprivation 2013, household income, maternal education, mother's marital status, birth weight, gestational age, child ethnicity, birth order, maternal age, and birth year. So some of them are from the Ministry of Health datasets. Some of them are from New Zealand 2013 census, and I'll talk about our data construction process shortly. So here we started from birth records from the Department of Internal Affairs, and then we linked these datasets to Ministry of Health in order to grab the mother's hospital records, so we can have their ICD-9 codes and therefore identify the mode of delivery. And the second linking step is to link this dataset to Ministry of Education datasets in order to grab the children's educational performance at high school level. And the next step is to link that to 2013 census to grab other socio-demographic variables, for example, NZDEP, New Zealand deprivation 2013, and household income. Okay, so we used linear regression for the percentile score because it's a continuous variable, and then for the rest, the highest endorsement level at NCEA level 2, and university entrance, we use the logistic regressions. So if we just look at the associations and adjust for the confounders, we found that C-section is actually associated and significantly associated with better educational outcomes. However, such association did not persist once we adjusted for the wide range of confounders listed above. So following covariate adjusted analysis, we did this sibling fixed effects analysis, aiming to minimize the impact of residual confounding and further account for unmeasured sibling invariant characteristics, such as genetic, environmental, and family-wide influences. Since the unmeasured influences on cognitive ability were accounted for in this sibling fixed effects analysis, the results here should provide less biased estimates. However, if we look at the C-section column here, we still see that none of these is significant. So what we can conclude is that we found no evidence supporting that C-section is significantly associated with educational outcomes both in the covariate adjusted analysis and as well as in the sibling fixed effects analysis, where residual confounding were further accounted for. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Eileen. Very interesting presentation. Again, we'll look at the questions after the final presentation, which is by Shannon Struck. Shannon is from the University of Manitoba, and her paper is Supported Playgroup Participation During Infancy and Developmental Health at School Entry, the Healthy Baby Community Support Program in Manitoba, Canada. Take it away, Shannon.
Okay, can you hear me now? Okay. Thank you for the introduction, Dennis. I'm honored to be here today to share part of my thesis work at this international conference. As mentioned, I am a student at the University of Manitoba, and I work with the scientists at the Manitoba Center for Health Policy. I would like to start by acknowledging that I work and live on the original lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene people, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. And I respect the treaties that were made on these territories. I acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and I'm dedicated to moving forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. I would like to thank my supervisors and community members, some of whom you may have seen present at this conference. But I'd also like to acknowledge the generous financial support I've received throughout my graduate program. Starting kindergarten ready to learn is considered by many a benchmark of successful early childhood that leads to later positive outcomes. However, in Manitoba, almost 30% of students are starting kindergarten vulnerable in one or more important areas of child development. Parents are considered a child's first and foremost teacher before school entry. Supported playgroups provide parents and children opportunities to learn and play together alongside other parents, children, and professional staff. These community-based programs aim to facilitate connections among peers and resources while building parenting capacity, promoting secure attachment, and improving child health and development. Formal early learning programs such as nursery school and preschools have been associated with later positive outcomes, including improved developmental health at school entry. However, limited research exists about less structured programs such as playgroups. This study looked at the Healthy Baby Community Support Program, or Healthy Baby, which is a government-funded supported playgroup that works with community partners and local health units to provide programs at over 100 locations throughout Manitoba. The programs connect new parents to their community while offering informal learning opportunities with free drop-in group sessions for pregnant women and families with infants up to 12 months old, regardless of income level. In Manitoba, developmental health is measured every 2 years with the Early Development Instrument, or the EDI. The EDI is a teacher-completed questionnaire that measures school readiness midway through the kindergarten year across 5 domains important for school success, including physical health and well-being, social competence, emotional maturity, language and cognitive development, and communication skills and general knowledge. The EDI has been used to measure the effectiveness of early childhood programs to enhance child development. However, little research exists using the EDI to measure the association between supported playgroups and developmental health. The importance of early childhood development has been well researched and documented as the foundation for many positive outcomes later in life. Supporting parents to build positive parent-child relationships during infancy is supported by science and our understanding of brain development. A limited but growing body of research suggests that playgroups support the healthy development of children. However, most studies to date are qualitative in nature or limited by small samples. A large Australian study found that playgroup attendance was associated with positive outcomes. However, unlike the Healthy Baby program in Manitoba, Australian playgroups are common with roughly 40% of all infants participating and with participants likely coming from higher socioeconomic status families. As such, the findings may not be generalizable to the Manitoba context. For this study, I used healthy baby attendance records linked to health, education, and social service data housed at the Manitoba Centre for Health Policy. The Manitoba Population Research Data Repository maintains whole population de-identified administrative data that includes over 99% of all Manitobans. The data are linkable across domains and within families. This study included data from hospital, census, education, income assistance, and early childhood programs, including Families First, Healthy Baby, and the EDI. The study cohort included just under 15,000 women with single live births between January 1st, 2004 and March 31st, 2011 that lived in or near communities that offered the Healthy Baby program weekly or more often. Among this group, roughly only 10.5% of mothers and infants attended the program. Multi-sector data was used to account for a variety of maternal and child characteristics related to program participation and or developmental health. Program attendance was the exposure of interest, which was measured by any postpartum visit to Healthy Baby by a mother with her infant. I considered a child to be vulnerable in a given domain of the EDI if they scored in the bottom 10% based on national norms of that domain. This slide includes key characteristics of the women in the study and shows that significant differences were noted between mothers who chose to attend Healthy Baby and those did not. Overwhelmingly, women who attended the program with their infants were more likely to live in conditions of stress or engage in at-risk activities, such as having smoked prenatally, having an anxiety disorder, or living in a home with violence between parents. The figure on the right showed that the standardized differences between groups. The gray diamonds show that for the most part, the differences between the groups were beyond the acceptable limit of 0.1. You can see here. Once I weighted the groups based on their likelihood of attending the program, I was able to reduce the differences to within the preset threshold as seen by the blue dots. Here we have the odds of developmental vulnerability among children who attended a supported playgroup in infancy. The unadjusted logistic regression models show that children who participated in postnatal Healthy Baby Community Support Program had increased odds of vulnerability in 4 out of 5 domains of the EDI: physical health and well-being, social competence, emotional maturity, and language and development. So this is in the opposite direction as we would have wanted. However, as we saw previously, there was measurable differences between mothers that chose to participate in the program and those that did not. To control for this, I applied inverse probability treatment weights that were calculated using the multi-sector linked data available at MCHP to balance characteristics between the exposed and unexposed groups. These weighted models now show that program participation is associated with reduced odds of vulnerability in 3 areas of development: physical health and well-being, language and cognitive development, and communication skills and general knowledge. However, program participation remained associated with increased odds of vulnerability in the domain of emotional maturity. As we saw, there were measurable differences between families that do and do not participate in the program. By using the linked multi-sector data at MCHP, I was able to control for these differences. However, there likely exists some inherent differences between the groups that are not reflected in the administrative data, such as parenting style, childcare arrangements, and participation in other programs. This may explain the unexpected findings that program participation was associated with increased odds of vulnerability in emotional maturity. Key factors that are known to influence emotional development, such as several adverse childhood experiences, were not included. Missing from the study was any information on a father's mental health or substance use or any family disruptions such as divorce and death. However, overall, the findings of this study add to the growing body of evidence that supporting parents of very young children with opportunities to play and learn together with their community may improve the health and wellness of children in our population. Thank you for listening to my presentation.
Thank you, Sharon. Very interesting. And so now we'll go to the Q&A session. And if people who are attending would be interested in sending questions, they can please do so. I've seen one question come in so far, and this is for Jennifer and Kim. Thank you very much for an interesting presentation. Excuse me, that's a different one. Now the questions got moved around a little bit. Okay, Jennifer and Kim, can you speak a little more about whether you saw differences between First Nation children versus others? Or are the clubs specifically or only providing these services to First Nation children? Apologies if the questioner missed that.
Sure, I can speak to that. And then Kim, if you want to add anything afterwards, just jump right in. So the purpose of the study was to compare amongst First Nations kids. So we didn't do a comparison between First Nations kids and other kids. Although I should also say that we did a larger study before we did this one, looking at all participants who had attended Boys and Girls Club in the city of Winnipeg. So it was a much larger cohort. And we saw many of the same trends, especially within the social outcomes. So First Nations kids make up, I'm not even sure I want to put a number to it, but a pretty good proportion of people who live in the neighborhoods that the clubs are in Winnipeg. And so that's why we were interested in focusing in and seeing whether those effects or the influence of the club was true, not just for the larger group of participants, but for First Nations specifically.
Thank you. And thanks, Eileen. Here's a question for you for a very interesting presentation. I believe the outcomes you examined were in adolescence. Is this right? Even if you did not find an association, do you think there might be scope for an effect in earlier life? Were you able to investigate these at all? It struck me, this is the questioner, that the SES confounders were all assessed in adolescence, and that time-varying confounders, including early life SES, might help disentangle these effects in early life.
Thanks, very good questions here. To answer the first question, yes, the outcomes that we examined were when the children turn 15 or 17, because that was in high school level. The reason that we didn't assess the outcomes at that early age was because in the administrative data sets here in New Zealand, the IDI, there is no available data assessing children's cognitive or educational outcomes from 4 years old to till these NCA results came out, which is in high school around age 15. And the reason that we did not use the data sets when children turn 4 years old, which is the before school check data sets, is because there are some issue around the data quality first, and second, the format of the data sets did not allow us to specifically look at those cognitive outcomes, because it gives a total score rather than individual score for each of the domains. So for example, say if we're interested in language abilities, but the total score would also combine some other, say, vision and hearing testing, so it was not available. And then the third question was the SES confounders were all assessed later in life, and that time-varying confounders, including early life SES, might help. Yes, the reason that we included 2013 census and used a lot of confounders obtained from 2013 census was because that was the only available census data sets that we could get at the time of analysis. And we suspect that the deprivation score or family SES would heavily correlate with the family previous SES, say 10 years ago. So we thought that using the current or the more closer to time SES should be fine.
Okay,
Yes.
Great. Thank you. Shannon, there's a question in here that's actually a little more methods oriented. And the question is, what is the scrambled identifier that you mentioned when displaying the slide of all the data sets you linked? And do you know the accuracy of the linkage process using that identifier?
Yeah, sure. So the scrambled identifier is the personal health information number that everyone in Manitoba is assigned by our provincial health system. And the linkage that goes on there is a quite elaborate process that I have no involvement in, but there are, I know that they are quite confident in the links there. And I believe there might be some papers about that around there, but the linkage is done between Manitoba Health and the Manitoba Centre for Health Policy, and all of the owners of the data are involved with the linkage process.
Very good. And another question someone asked was, do you think that your results are applicable to other societies or countries? How robust do you think these might be beyond your community?
Well, we've seen similar findings in other areas around the world, particularly in Australia, and there were some similar findings in Toronto in Canada as well. What the literature about playgroups is that they're thinking that the mechanism at play here is the fact that parents are coming together and they're creating connections with their peers and community supports. And so in theory, that should work in other communities. But again, you'd have to look at every different context where the program is available.
And just to reiterate, you found effects in 3 of the domains, correct? After control all of the various factors, and 2 where you did not see a significant difference at that point.
Well, there was one that we found a significant difference in the direction that you would hope not to see, that actually the kids that were attending were more vulnerable emotional maturity. But that domain that you might need some little bit more digging in, which I didn't have time to do in my master's thesis. But and the other one was non-significant.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, as we've learned here from Eileen and Jennifer's presentations, non-significance of findings are really important and important to report, so they can guide our thinking about where to go next, whether it's a sample size issue or whether there are other avenues to go in terms of pursuing this further. Jennifer, you and Kim and your team, do you have ideas on next steps based on this project that you're going to take? Are you going to continue to look at the Boys and Girls Clubs as a program that has these spillover effects, or are you taking a different route? What are you thinking?
We've got lots of ideas and lots of options. So it was Boys and Girls Club who came to us originally with this idea of evaluating their program. And so they're really keen to do more research, and they had proposed to us that we run these initial analyses, like I mentioned with my last question, we did the whole population of Winnipeg first, and then zeroed in on First Nations kids and also Métis kids individually. And then the plan is to give it a couple of years. They're going to collect more data. We're going to accumulate more data at the repository, and hopefully look at a bigger cohort. And then we can dig into some other questions, maybe something to do with mental health, maybe just extending the study a little bit more longitudinally. And then even just yesterday, Kim and I were talking about these study findings as we were prepping for this presentation. And she said, and Kim, jump in here if you'd like to. She said, do the clubs collect any data from the kids and the youth themselves? What did they say about the impact that the clubs are having on their lives? And, I just sort of sat back and I went, what a great idea. I mean, I don't think they do currently. I don't know that Boys and Girls Clubs in COVID times especially have the capacity to do data collection right now, but it might be something that we could talk about. There's a questionnaire that's in use here in Manitoba called the Strengths and Difficulties Questionnaire that Kim knows more about than I do, but it's a more holistic tool for kind of collecting information on how kids are doing, what they're struggling with, what they're excelling at. And so that might be an interesting direction to take in terms of sort of fleshing out the first stab that we took at this research study.
Right. because it seems as though some of these results are that you were looking for are indirect outcomes, as opposed to some of the things like, you know, safety after, you know, after school, reduced opportunities for delinquency or any kind of mischief, you know, different things that these programs are enabling people just by being together to support each other, and which are important outcomes. We're not expecting all of our social programs to have health impacts and all these other things over time, long term. They're mainly intended to provide enrichment and good, safe, protective services. But Eileen, how about you in your case? What are you thinking about next step? It sounds as though so far, based on the data, you're not confirming your model of the pathway that you think might be having effects from C-section versus vaginal birth. What's your next step?
The next step. So we also wanted to look into some longitudinal data sets that's available in the New Zealand context. For example, the Growing Up in New Zealand data sets, to look at, as the question mentioned there, if this association is detectable at an early age. However, another argument there is that if this association is gonna eventually be washed out later in life, does it still matter at early age if there's something? Yes. And the other possibility to carry on is to wait a couple of years and till more data sets become available in the IDI environment, then we could possibly enlarge our sample size and use more up-to-date covariates variables.
And what do people think is the reason underlying the growth in C-sections that's occurring there in New Zealand? Why has it gone from 23 to 27% of births in such the last 10 years?
Yes, a great question. So a lot of moms would prefer the convenience of knowing an exact date of delivery. And also sometimes mother would to just not going through a long non-progressive labor and then go into C-section. They prefer to go into C-section straight away. So
there's must be a lot more to it, I suppose.
Yes.
There's many aspects. Okay, cool. Hey, Jennifer and Kim, can you talk a little bit about the collaboration between an academic partner and a community partner? And have you worked with each other before? How did this collaboration come together? And how would you describe the value or aspects of it that might be noteworthy for our audience today?
Oh, that's a great question. So the collaboration was a new one for us at the Manitoba Centre for Health Policy and for the Manitoba First Nations Education Resource Centre. What happened was at the Manitoba Centre for Health Policy, we have a program of research looking at outcomes from government and social programs. So we had a big grant a few years ago where we evaluated a number of programs offered in Manitoba, the Healthy Babies program being one of them, the one that Shannon talked about. And then we had, through various avenues, started working more with some of the Indigenous organizations in Manitoba. And so we applied for more funding for doing the same kinds of evaluations for some of the same programs, but looking specifically at First Nations kids. And looking at Métis kids as well in a separate branch of the study. And so I think it wasn't all my handiwork to kind of get us connected. Certainly there were at least 5 or 6 other researchers at the Manitoba Centre for Health Policy involved, but we reached out to MF-NERC and a couple of other organizations saying, is this something you'd be interested in working on with us? Would you like to write this proposal with us to get some funding and then work with us on the projects? And there was a positive response. And so it's been a really, really fruitful partnership. I don't know, Kim, if you're still on the line, if there's anything else that you'd like to add.
Yes, yeah, I know I was pulled in later on in the partnership here, and but the initial discussions in that, I came in later, but I know it's great to have the opportunity to be involved in the research and, you know, involving the First Nations organizations in the process. And I know in discussion when we were talking yesterday, there's so much opportunity, more opportunities to do more collaborative partnerships for different research topics. Like we were having a good brainstorm yesterday. And so yeah, like for the First Nations, like the schools we work with are on reserve. And of course, a large population of our First Nations live in Winnipeg, and, you know, so it does represent our First Nations children in those contexts. So it's great to have that partnership and to be involved in that research. So thanks for involving us.
Yes, some of the what we were talking about yesterday in terms of more collaboration or more studies together has to do with the data that Kim and her organization are collecting in the First Nations school system. So that's brand new, I think. I don't know that other school divisions in Canada are collecting specifically First Nations data. So that's a really exciting opportunity that that I'd love to be involved in.
Great, thank you. Shannon, another question came in for you. Any differences in outcomes between children of single parents versus coupled parents, or did you control for parental relationship status?
Yeah, so the parents, the mother's marital status was included in the propensity score that I put in the weight, so it was controlled for. But we did see that most of the mothers were single. So, for example, in the exposed group, just almost 75% of the mothers were single that were attending the program. So yeah, future studies could definitely stratify by that, and that would be very interesting to see the difference.
And what are your plans as next steps? This was your master's thesis, I think, and what have you decided you're going to do, or how might you follow this work up?
Well, as Jennifer mentions, there's a number of projects looking at these programs with First Nations and Métis partners. So we will be looking at this within those groups. But for myself, I'm actually defending this thesis tomorrow. And then, you know, I'm graduating and moving on to a job. So yeah, I hope to stay, you know, in touch with Manitoba Centre for Health Policy, but I'll be moving on.
Very good. Well, good luck with that, and hopefully congratulations soon to follow. So we only have a few minutes left, and then there's going to be a hard stop. The recording or the session will automatically close here. I thought for each of you might be able to give any final thoughts you might have, either about other panelists' presentations or about a takeaway from your work or where you want to go next. Jennifer?
Oh, okay. Takeaway. So I always find it interesting to see when I apply to conferences where my work gets slotted in, and it happened to be in an education focused session this time. So I think my takeaway has been and continues to be just being kind of becoming aware and enjoying kind of the intersection of so many different ways that we use our data and how we link it together, but also how interconnected it is to other data sets. And, you know, my study in particular, I didn't get a chance to talk about health outcomes or anything like that, but we focused in on the education and the social ones this time. There's just so many different ways to look at the data, and it tells us such different stories depending on how you link it together.
Yes, great, thank you. Eileen.
There's one thing I wanted to add to the question you just asked. Why is there an increasing trend in C-section in New Zealand? So first of all, I would like to address one limitation of this study, which is that we could not identify elective C-section and emergency C-section. But from the Stats New Zealand's report, we see that emergency C-section remained at about the same rate across years. So the increasing trend in C-section is mainly driven by elective C-section. And some reasons related to that is that mothers may, we know that mothers are giving birth at a more older age. So that may relate to some pre-existing conditions for the mothers, and hence a C-section might be a safer choice. And of course, there are other reasons behind this increasing figure, but that's what I wanted to add to.
Very good.
Yes.
And Shannon, anything takeaway you'd like us to keep in mind?
Well, my takeaway has been then, as I've been, diving deep into my thesis, to get ready to defend, is, is the whole COVID reality, and how, this program that I looked at, was leading to some positive outcomes, but it's really the getting together as a community that's really impacting the families, and it makes me a little bit sad, and also hopeful that in the future, the scientists that are here together will be able to look back at the data and try to figure out what we can do to help children and families recover from the pandemic.
Yeah. Well, thank you. That's a interesting. I'm sure there's going to be many projects looking in the future at what the impact of the pandemic has been on all of these particular efforts that folks have been studying. But thank you all for your thoughtful presentations, and thank you to our attendees for being here. Once again, I want to give a shout out to Jennifer Enns and Kimberly Olaney for their project, Eileen Lee and Shannon Struck. Really appreciate your joining the conference this year, and hopefully we get to see you in person at a conference in future years. Got a lot of fans of linked administrative data out there who come to sessions like this. But again, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dennis.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.